Hey, DawgNation, happy Friday to you. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. I think today is going to be a really good show. Jeff Sentel on the way. We'll go on the road with him, assisted by AAA today, and it's obviously been a great week for UGA. You know, when you add two former five-star recruits as transfers, big-time players, Rick Gilbert, Darian Kendrick, obviously that's going to soak up a lot of the conversation time, and this week has certainly proven that. However, simultaneous to all of this, as we've been saying, has also been a really big week for UGA recruiting too, and today is going to be the day in which we kind of try to put all the pieces together for all of this. In fact, we're going to break the protocol just a little bit, going to bring Jeff on a little earlier than we normally might, just because I think it's that kind of day where you want to do those kinds of things. We'll also talk about some of the other stuff related to Georgia. There is one opinion that keeps coming up from Georgia fans, and I think it's actually a little different right now than what some of like the national media types are saying about Georgia. And I want to highlight that contrast here today on the show too, and plus we'll kind of shout out a couple of the great dogs from years past for a very deserving honor. So we'll do all of this. It's busy, it's fun, and it wouldn't be possible if you weren't here, and of course our friends from Kroger as well. So let's get it started. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So on this show, I try to be as candid as I possibly can be, and I want to be very honest with you right now about something really fun going on around Georgia. It's obviously been an incredibly busy time for UGA recruiting. The opening up of the opportunity for visits, the ending of the dead period, has been as advertised as we predicted it would be. Kind of a crazy, just a race of players trying to get on campuses, Georgia trying to host as many as they can, and the other schools that Georgia competes with in recruiting kind of doing the same thing. There has just been a lot of that over the course of the last few days. In fact, and here's where the candor comes in, there's almost been so much of it that it's a little bit difficult to chronicle on a show like this. To be completely honest with you, you read like, say, Jeff Sentel at DawgNation.com, and he does a lot of kind of blog-style posts regarding the, hey, here's the update for today, June 4th, and here's who's coming in here, and you do the same thing for the previous days. You just kind of bullet point, sort of story by story, name by name, go through all of this, and I think that's a really good way to cover all of that news. A show like this is a little bit more of kind of a big picture type thing. We take the preponderance of the news and we try to distill it down to kind of what matters most. Here's the key takeaway. Here's kind of the big theme related to all this. And when you have so much news and it's all happening so fast, sometimes kind of getting that big picture analysis of all of this is a little more difficult to do. So today we're going to roll up our sleeves, try to do that. In fact, I'm going to break with protocol a little bit, just given the fact there is so much recruiting news. I'm actually going to bring on Jeff on today's show much earlier than I usually would, because I think it's that kind of day. I think you want to hear him on this show. I guess as a way of setting all this up, though, let me give you what I think, just very quickly here, kind of in no particular order. Let me give you kind of what I think are the big themes that I kind of see kind of emerging here, the kind of thoughts that I have, and I'm going to ask Jeff Sentel to put a little bit more of his own thoughts around this in a few minutes when he joins us to talk some UGA recruiting. When you look at some of the guys who are coming in and have been in on their way in, I'm thinking about five-star safety Kamari Wilson. I'm thinking about four-star running back Branson Robinson, who's probably as impressive as any running back that Georgia's recruited, at least that I can tell, over the course of the last few years. Some of these guys are a little bit different than the normal recruiting process would seem to lead you to believe. I have become conditioned to expect an air of mystery around certain recruits, and I've become conditioned to assume that a lot of recruits were going to work really hard to kind of keep their cards close to the vest and protect that at kind of every twist and turn, and they're just not going to look to reveal a lot of themselves throughout their process. And obviously that's a recruit's prerogative. He's certainly free to do that. Many of them choose to do that. However, in the case of Wilson, who's been photographed at UGA, in the case of Robinson, who's on his way here there as well, you don't really get the sense they don't seem to desire that level of mystery as much. I mean, Jeff's had a couple of great interviews with Branson Robinson, and Robinson in those interviews has made no secret about the fact that, yes, Georgia is his leader. Similarly for Wilson, he's been very willing to be connected to UGA on social media. Now, he's also talked about other schools there as well. But some of the top prospects, some of the guys who are on their way here this week or have been here at Georgia, they don't seem to be quite as willing to kind of conjure up that mystery around their recruitment. You're kind of left to wonder as a fan, wait, is it really going to be this easy, or are there bigger challenges in store as Georgia tries to win those recruitments? I think that's one of the things we're kind of watching there. I'm also kind of interested in this, and this is kind of where I guess I don't think of myself as a pessimistic person, but there is sort of a natural pessimism that kind of pops in from time to time. As I said before, maybe I'm greatly influenced by the history of Larry Munson and kind of the way that he used to view things. Maybe that kind of covers and clouds the way that I sometimes view things there as well. And simultaneous, admittedly, to me being really excited about all the visitors that Georgia is hosting, you can't help but notice when other Georgia recruits are visiting other places there as well. I think about, Kojo and Twee and Oscar Delp both being in Alabama. Christian Miller saying some nice things there about Ohio State. Mikael Williams is kind of on his way around making, his tour as prospects are going to do here when it comes to all this kind of stuff. And so, part of me does, kind of wonder here, well, as Georgia's making its pitch to all these guys, how hard are the other schools working to make that same pitch to other players that Georgia's interested in? And when all this kind of shakes out with official visits happening here right now, unofficial visits, in some cases guys taking an unofficial visit, circling back around, and then taking another official visit on top of that, when the dust settles and it's all said and done, who really does kind of emerge as having won this particular week, these couple of weekends here, this month of June? Who ends up being the big winner in all of that? And I think that's still yet to be determined, and I'm hoping that Jeff Sentel can kind of shed some light on that. And I guess the final thing that kind of jumps out at me, and you saw, Big Bear Alexander a moment ago on the screen there, it certainly seems like, you're going to read more about this at the pages of DawgNation.com, that Georgia has once again made a nice impression on Alexander. Alexander, seems to enjoy the idea of following in the footsteps with Jordan Davis. I should say following the footsteps of Jordan Davis, there at UGA. Boy, this is one of those that just seems like a really interesting recruitment, right? I mean, Georgia going into Texas, pulling out a five-star, top, among the top players in the country, defensive tackle there, position of need, because Dave is about to leave the program. And yet you kind of wonder, well, how much will Texas A&M make that push on him, especially now that Nick Williams is employed by the Aggies and around Bear Alexander at this defensive line spot. I think this is probably the most interesting year for defensive line recruiting that has existed since we've been doing DawgNation Daily. I'm dating this back to the 2015 season when we first started all this. I can't remember a time that Georgia was more involved with more elite-level defensive linemen than they are right now. So many so that you almost say, well, there's not room for everybody, so who are the true recruiting priorities when it comes to that? This is a fascinating time for UGA recruiting, and so different from a year ago when we were kind of left to speculate, what was what and who was who and what George was doing behind the scenes to win with these recruits. You don't have to speculate quite on this as much anymore. These guys are on campus, and many of them have chosen to be very public about their UGA visit. Some of them have even been good enough to share kind of behind-the-scenes video of their experiencing these facilities for the first time and everything that goes along with that. It's a much different recruiting cycle a year ago than it was in 2021, I think, and I'm sure you do as well, a change for the better, but still a lot to unpack. So here on today's show with Jeff Sentel, we'll do our part to do that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, there is some business to take care of. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref. Actually, we're, I think, preempted on The Ref today, but looking forward to be back with them on Monday. So that's really exciting. And, of course, podcasts, however you get to us on the podcast world, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever else. We're just really glad to have you as a part of the show. And a big thanks to our friends for Kroger for making it all possible. One of the things I love about Kroger is not only does Kroger take care of its customers, and boy, they've been taking care of us now for a long time, especially over the course of the last year and a half with everything we've been through. Kroger was there for us every step of the way. But in addition to taking care of those who shop at Kroger each and every day, Kroger also takes great care of the folks who work in their stores, helping provide care for customers. And if you want to find out just how true this is, then take that next step to explore the employment opportunities that Kroger has available right now. They've got several positions at almost all their stores here offering more than just a paycheck. I'm talking about a total rewards package, which include tuition reimbursement potentially, associate discounts, and partner perks, so much more. This is a great benefits package to be a part of everything that's going on there at Kroger. Tremendous rewards for being a part of the employment experience there at Kroger. So make sure you check this out. It's jobs.kroger.com. That's the website, jobs.kroger.com. And you can find out about everything going on in terms of Kroger, really welcoming in that next generation of employees there, and obviously doing a great job of taking care of those folks. I'm always really proud of the way that Kroger does that. All right, as I promised you, we'll get Jeff Sentel here in a moment. Before that, though, let me take care of some other business here with the dogs on the field right now, the current roster as we go around the doghouse. And there is one thing that I think that Georgia fans themselves are saying right now that's a little bit different and maybe puts the UGA fan at odds with some in the national media in the aftermath of what happened with Rick Gilbert and Darian Kendrick, both announcing they were transferring to Georgia here this week. There's a tendency now among the media, and listen, there's always going to be a need for content, always going to be a need for takes and things along those lines, and the truth is I'm really no different, I guess. But the immediate response to this from certain national writer types, I think it's probably fairly well encapsulated with what Brandon Marcello wrote at 247sports.com. But the arrival of the Gilberts, the arrival of the Kendricks, and everything else that Georgia's done here this offseason, that it maybe puts more additional pressure on Georgia to win a national championship right now. Let me read you what Brandon Marcello says about this at 247sports.com. He says, no more quarterback controversies, no concerns with depth. No more excuses, Marcello writes. It's time for Georgia to beat Alabama. It's time to lift a couple of trophies. It's time to win a national championship. That Brandon Marcello writing for 247sports.com. And the general feeling of this, I don't disagree with. I mean, look, it was going to be time for all that kind of stuff, whether Georgia brought in Gilbert or Kendrick or not, right? I mean, that was going to be true no matter what. So it's not wildly different now in terms of expectations because Georgia has done this. But the one sentiment that I think that Marcello probably correctly arrives at is that if you talked about Georgia in the preseason or, the kind of the pre-spring world and, kind of the start of the offseason when the calendar year began in 2021, I think one of the things you would say is, well, Georgia should be a national championship contender, but how good is this defensive secondary? Are there too many concerns at cornerback on the heels of losing the Eric Stokes and the Tyson Campbells and the DJ Daniel and the guys who are not here anymore? You want to count Mark Webb in that there as well. Are there too many concerns there for this to be a viable national championship contender? And it should not be discounted. The aggressive way in which Georgia has met that need, bringing in Tyke Smith, who played at an All-American level a year ago at West Virginia, bringing in now a Darian Kendrick, who has played at an all-conference level at Clemson and potentially a first-round pick level when it comes to next year's NFL draft. All of a sudden now you have taken what was potentially a debilitating question mark that would hold Georgia back from winning a national championship, and you've essentially eliminated that as a weakness, and that should not be discounted, and that does, I think, make Georgia more of a viable national championship contender. The one thing we've always kind of pushed back on is the idea of it's national championship or bust. We don't believe in the notion of bust right now for Georgia because, those opposing fans or opposing programs, rivals to UGA, the idea that somehow Georgia's going to disappear from the national stage this year, whether it wins a national championship or not, that's wishful thinking. That's just simply not going to happen. However, the big disagreement that seems to exist amongst some fans and national media types like Marcello there for 24/7 Sports is the idea of, well, Georgia's got it all figured out. There's zero reason why Georgia shouldn't win a national championship. Believe it or not, some Georgia fans, and this is a little bit opposite of what you might think, some Georgia fans have a little more skepticism about their own team's roster than some of the folks in the national media. And one of the things that commonly comes up, it has been an issue on this show this week. It was in our comment section last night when we got together with the rest of the DawgNation team to do Cover 4 Live. One of the things that has come up a few times in the midst of all that is, I don't know, BA. I love the idea of adding a Rick Gilbert, and I'm excited about what he's going to be able to do alongside the other offensive weapons that exist for this program and JT Daniels at quarterback. But what about that offensive line situation? It's like offensive line was already a source of some concern for some fans before. But now that the defensive secondary has been addressed as emphatically as it is, it's like an even bigger spotlight is put on now with the fact that Georgia has at least one unsettled starting position along its offensive line, may have more than one, ahead of what could be a really good year and a special year for the Georgia offense. There is and I don't believe it's an illegitimate thought, but there are a lot of thoughts among fans of, boy, you better hope your offensive line's, fully taken care of. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to exploit all of this offensive talent that you have. And I think that's really interesting in the way that kind of puts some Georgia fans at odds with national media type who kind of take a more overarching global view of the Georgia roster and say, yep, that's it. That's a team that's ready to win the national championship. Whereas the Georgia fan himself, who obviously has an emotional tie to this and wants that to be true, says, no, let me see what happens with my offensive line first. Let me see if Warren Erickson does truly emerge as a capable center, and that seems to be where all this is heading. Let me see which position Jamari Salyer starts at. Is it at the left guard spot and one of the other guys, be it Xavier Truss, Broderick Jones, Amarius Mims, they emerge at left tackle? Or is it Salyer playing the spot that he played a good bit last year at tackle, and it's someone like Tate Ratledge who gets the nod there at left guard? Let me see how all that plays out. And I have great respect for that. Here's the only thing I'll say about this, though, is that while I would clearly acknowledge, and I have said this many times, that issues on the offensive line could potentially get you beat against Clemson, and obviously it's the kind of thing, if you're not at least good on the offensive line, that could hold you back from winning a national championship. The honest truth is I'm probably not as concerned about this as maybe the average fan might be, because I look at the potential of Ratledge at guard or the potential of Truss, Mims, Jones at tackle, and I say, with all of those bodies and as many top recruits as kind of exist in that conversation, the idea of Georgia finding five who can play, to me, still seems more likely than not. When it comes to the situation at left tackle, which admittedly is probably the biggest question here, I would argue that whatever happens at left tackle for Georgia will be no worse than whatever Jamari Salyer provides. And I'd say that last year Salyer played that spot at a pretty high level. Not his NFL position, that's probably more guard. But when Salyer played tackle a year ago, I would say the results there were really good there in that regard. So to me, for 2021 in Georgia along its offensive line at left tackle, you will be no worse than whatever Salyer provides, because obviously if the other left tackle is worse than Salyer, then it stands obvious to me they will move Salyer to that position, because I think based on what you saw at G-Day and based on what you heard during the spring, there is some confidence that Ratledge might be ready to go at guard, either as a starter this year or kind of that super sub role that many great Georgia offensive linemen have kind of been in before. So an interesting contrast there. Some Georgia fans asking more questions about their own team's offensive line than the national media seems to be asking right now. I'm obviously respectful of that feeling, but I think at the moment I'm probably a little bit more confident in Georgia's ability to kind of figure all of that out. All right, great stuff to get going here today. Important recruiting conversation to kind of unpack right now. No better guy to do that with than our buddy Jeff Sentel. We'll get into all of that with him. And by the way, before we're done here today, the SEC has changed its intraconference transfer rule. We will address that on the program. Also, big news involving a little bit of a musical chairs revolving door when it comes to SEC assistant coaches. We'll cover that on the show today, and we will give some great credit where it's due to two former Georgia Bulldogs who got some very good news here this week. So we will cover all of that on the program with you here today. So glad to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. But for now, let's talk some recruiting. On the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sentel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I will say hello to Jeff Sentel, and we're going to, I guess, keep it on this side here today. I will say hello to Jeff Sentel, and great to have him with us on the road, assisted by AAA here today. Jeff, I said this before you joined us, that it's been an amazing week of UGA recruiting news. It's flying fast and furious. And yet, it's almost, for a show like this, we kind of go big picture and kind of try to encapsulate it and give you the key bullet points and the overarching themes. In one respect, it's almost like a little bit of a challenging thing to be able to do, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of glad to have you with us here today. So let me start big picture with you. You can take it wherever you want to go. When you look at what has happened over the course of the last few days, when you look at what's going to happen in the days to come, what is your big picture takeaway of the lifting of the dead period thus far for UGA?
Good morning, everybody. It's funny. There's a lot of things going through my mind when you ask that question. First of all, I think Kirby Smart might be the most photographed human being on the planet over the last 3 days. He's taken more selfies than the Addams family at a historic baseball ballpark, man. I tell you, there's a lot of Kirby floating around social media. You hear other fan bases chirping about how in the world he gets the opportunity to take so many pictures in a day. I think I'm going to zoom in on this weekend, Brandon, because I'm hesitant to say, here's a quick hotshot take, as you could say. Georgia's offensive firepower, Georgia's offensive skill positions won't be good in 2023, 2024, 2025 unless this class is an offensive home run. And it would be largely because of the skill guys that are in town this weekend. Gunnar Stockton, Oscar Delp, Kojo Antwi, Branson Robinson, Denylin Morissette, Addison Nichols. Now, I think Georgia's never going to match its offensive line recruiting of the last 3 or 4 years, much less ever. But I think the skill positions really need it. When you can add he's no longer a 5, but you can add a top 5 quarterback in Gunnar, a top 5 quarterback in a top 5 running back in Branson Robinson, who's in town this weekend from Mississippi. Out of the 8 officials, you got the nation's number 2 tight end. I think Kojo Antwi is the nation's number 13 receiver. Morissette is a guy that has a strong skill set that will remind a lot of folks maybe of a more polished Kearis Jackson coming out of high school. I think for Georgia to be all it wants to be offensively in this class and in the future, I think these visits have to go well, especially because, Brandon, these guys have been inundated. For Oscar Delp, for one thing there, he's visited Alabama, he's visited Clemson, and he's visited Georgia all in the span of this week, and he's seen every toy, every photo shoot thrown at him. And for Georgia's facilities to be really special and eye-catching to Delp this weekend, that would be saying something.
So I think that's a great place to start, and I'm glad you described that the way that you did. And in the person of Kojo Antwi for a moment here, Kojo is the exact kind of recruit with the exact kind of recruiting story that probably gives someone like me who tries to follow this stuff closely a little bit of angst, because on the one hand, the underlying fundamentals for Antwi and Georgia seem to be well-founded, right? He's good friends with guys who you think might be going to Georgia. He's good friends with guys, at least my understanding of it is, good friends with guys who are already committed to UGA, including his relationship with Gunnar Stockton. So it seems like those tentacles that would kind of connect Antwi to Georgia are pretty substantial. On the other hand, there's been the Ohio State rumors. There's been the Texas A&M rumors. There's the, visit to Alabama here this week for Antwi that drew some praise from him. He's one of those guys that, even though all the reasons why he should pick Georgia seem to be a fairly long list, there's just always a lot of chatter about Antwi and other schools. So I guess my question for that Georgia fan who wonders about Kojo here, how worried should a Georgia fan be about the pull from other schools for Kojo Antwi?
Brandon, I think you'll worry about it. I'm going to be honest here, man. I think you'll worry about it until the moment where Georgia's offensive reputation is not right up there with Alabama and Ohio State. And I think you'll worry about it for that long. And I think this season will go a long way to proving that. Now, he wants to make his decision on July the 5th. And good for him, because he wants to do it to honor his mother on her birthday. But, Georgia's hay won't be in the barn about, hey, are they caught up to Alabama and Ohio State yet? I think Alabama could complicate things depending on how much Alabama wants him. I know Kojo Antwi is a really smart guy, and he can certainly see what Alabama just added in the 2021 cycle. I think they got 4 receivers that are all just as highly rated as him, if not higher. They also brought in another transfer that thinks he's going to be one and done for the league. So I guess sentimentality, relationships, location are the things that would probably be the biggest pulls for Georgia right now. And besides being fielded like he's prioritized. But I think Georgia's going to need to show Kojo Antwi a little more than that I mean, if we wanted to talk about pull and location and sentimentality, then Texas A&M is really a school that checks all those boxes for Coach Joe Antwi as well. They've got an offensive reputation under Jimbo Fisher as well. He's got family in Texas A&M, and he was kind of warming to Texas A&M until a lot of factors started bouncing in Georgia's favor. It's funny, Brandon, as I go through this and roll through the mental Rolodex of all the things I want to categorize and say, I think Brandon, you're going to end up shaking your fist maybe at Texas A&M with more consternation this year than in any certain cycle. I think they've got some real estate in your worry center of your brain for
Sure.
Georgia 2020 recruits.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk more about that over the course of our conversation, obviously. But let me say one more thing on this topic, and you tell me if my read on this is correct. There's a very good chance, I think, that Oscar Delp and Coach Joe Antwi both go to Georgia. But I kind of see the Antwi-Delp situation different. For instance, opposing fan message boards talk about Delp all the time, especially in light of, Gilbert choosing UGA. There was some, kind of thought among rival fans that made it easier to get Delp away from Georgia for the class of 2022. I think that's an erroneous assumption, but that's an assumption that some fans make. The point I'm making, though, here is that I've always kind of assumed that Delp probably did have a fairly strong emotional tie to Georgia. At least that's the read I've gotten on the situation from previous interviews that you've done with him, that would make it really, really hard to have any other school, pull him away, no matter how deep Georgia might be, the tight end position. I guess I don't quite get that same level of vibe from Antwi, and that's not me saying I don't think he's coming to Georgia, but Antwi kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the Metro Atlanta prospects we've talked about before who are obviously considering Georgia because most elite players in the country do, and yet it almost seems like Georgia doesn't necessarily have the home court advantage in this recruitment, other than the fact that he's friends with Stockton and things like that. Is that an accurate read of this situation?
Yeah, I think you jumped into a lot of stuff right there. I think Georgia's been in a great spot with Delp for a while. I think Todd Hartley has recruited him like he's the next Travis Kelce, basically going back to when he blew up in the early portion of his junior year. Daily messages, good communication, strong communication, recruiting the family as well. I think Georgia's worry center for Delp is smaller. Clemson, you got to watch Clemson because there's a family tie there as well. They've got all the stuff. But, Brandon, I don't know if you notice this, but when you think tight ends and tight end usage, besides a draft pick here or there, Alabama doesn't really have a lot more production numbers on its tight ends compared to Georgia.
Right.
They have draft picks, don't get me wrong, but a lot of those guys are basically making the league and being drafted highly based on measurables and then key games, whereas Clemson can't say either for tight end. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed for many college football fans to name me 5 Clemson tight ends over the last 5 or 6 years, especially ones that were productive in the mighty ACC. But I think Antwi is a guy that, Brendan, I know you very well, and I think you love to worry about receivers, and you love to worry about missing piece receivers for Georgia, and those are certainly quantifiable takes there for Coach Joe Antwi. And I just think there's a mix of things with him that's going to make it. I'm going to say it's going to make it difficult for Georgia, especially within his timeline. You want players like Antwi that are in Georgia's backyard to already be leaning towards Georgia in their junior year. That wasn't really the case. Joe was kind of a guy that really took off in his junior year as well. But you want location and sentimentality to be the closing deals and not the anchor things about why a guy like Coach Joe Antwi decides he needs to go play at Georgia.
It's On the Road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sentel here today. You think about AAA for its legendary roadside assistance. My family, we travel a lot during the summer. I'm thankful to have AAA with me wherever I go. But I also want you to think about AAA when it comes to auto insurance there as well, because that obviously matters, and AAA can really save you money. In fact, my recommendation to you is to switch and save today. Those who do save on average $529. Very easy to get in touch with. It's AAA.com/auto insurance. That's AAA.com/auto insurance. Check them out. I think you'll be very pleased with what you see. And, of course, it's great to have AAA delivering On the Road with Jeff Sentel here to us today. on DawgNation Daily. So you mentioned Texas A&M a moment ago and kind of the spot they'll occupy in folks' mind as this 2022 class continues to unfold. And my assumption is that's a reference to Bear Alexander, who has been in Athens this week. I guess had a little bit of a travel difficulty there for a while, but eventually makes his way to Athens, gets a chance to have a great visit at University of Georgia. One of these examples of why following modern college football recruiting is really fun. You actually get a lot of photographic evidence of this because of smartphones, things like that you just wouldn't have been able to get in the past. And so the sense that you get here is, well, Alexander really had a good time, and obviously he feels a bond to Jordan Davis, who clearly UGA fans hope that Alexander is the heir apparent to Jordan Davis here at the University of Georgia related to all of this. Jeff, this is just one of those, and you're not going to be able to tell me anything on this. I think the Alexander recruitment is so important for Georgia, both because he's a really good player and also just because he comes across as a great dude. I just love to have him at UGA. This is such a interesting recruiting battle. Georgia going on the road. Yeah, there you go. Nice photo of Davis and Alexander together. Two big behemoths. You love seeing them side by side like that, for those of you watching on video anyway. But the point here, though, is I'm just not going to take yes for an answer on this until it's actually ink on paper, letter of intent, filed away wherever these things go. And it's not because I think Big Bear's going to Texas A&M. I truly don't. I have no reason to think that anyway. This, for me, is all about the nature of what Georgia's trying to do here. This would be as aggressive and as swing for the fences as anything that Smart has done since he's been UGA coach. To go into hostile territory like the state of Texas, to pull a player like Bear Alexander out, given the fact that, Texas A&M has its sea legs under it just a bit, and they're kind of, building their program up. They've done well in recruiting. To lose out on a player like Alexander to Georgia would just be as big a flex from Kirby as you've seen. And so I'm going to keep watching this one closely every step of the way. What did this week mean for Georgia in its attempt to do what I just described?
So, Brandon, I think Big Bear, I got to spend some time with him this week. Man, there's just something really different and at the core of it, really good about that dude and kind of where his path is right now. Brendan, I don't know if I've ever, and it's funny because, you talk about a major flex. Bear's kind of attitude is, it's almost, he's very humble that Georgia wants a player like him. And the stuff with Jordan Davis and passing on that 99. I think I want your audience this morning to hear this, but this is before the story will go up on DawgNation.com today, but, he almost feels like there's a story I want to share that I think sums it up nicely. So he's in the locker room taking a bunch of pictures, and normally everybody is looking hype and, really trying to look tough, like they're yelling. And, Bear was growling a couple of times in those photos, but there was a moment where he looked at his hands, he looked around the locker room, he looked at the 99 jersey, and Brendan, he almost seemed reverential about the things in his life that are just falling in place for him. And I know Georgia fans are going to worry because this is the type of player to worry about. And no matter how many detailed items I can pop up right now to make DawgNation feel a little bit better about Bear going forward, I just think there's so many of them, but they're different. So Texas A&M has some coaches. They have some good defensive line coaches. They have some good defensive coaches. They got Nick Williams now. But I think at the most, Texas A&M has 4 or 5 ways to catch Bear's attention or to touch his mind and to touch his heart. I think Georgia has 25 people like that. I really do. I think Bear went down to Georgia, not trying to sound like Charlie Daniels.
I started to say that feels like a parody song that we need to write. I could get behind a little bit of that. The Bear went down to Georgia.
The Bear went down to Georgia, and
looking for a title to steal.
You're going to be the yeah, I like that. Looking for a Florida quarterback to attack. So I mean, he did his homework, man. He talked to Jordan Davis. He talked to Devontae Wyatt, and he's like, "Man, I'm loving Georgia. Is this really real? This is first time back on campus." Brennan, we talked about with Jeremiah Alexander on our show last night, where I think Clemson won the pandemic recruiting for Jeremiah Alexander. Well, I think Georgia won the pandemic recruiting for Barry Alexander, and they won it last fall as well. And that's why he committed on National Signing Day for the 2021 class and not just his class. He speaks like he can't wait to get to Georgia. He knows how many months more it will be. And the thing that went through his mind was just how blessed and lucky and humbled he is to get the chance to be a Georgia Bulldog. He loved everything about the visit, loved everything about the place. But really, with Georgia and Bayer, that story we shared last weekend from Dayon Bowie where he basically said, Bayer's acting like the leader of the class. He's getting guys involved in the group chat. He's getting guys in there for weekly meetings so they can talk and connect and bond. Brennan, there's not a lot of flip targets Georgia has had in recent years that were doing things like that. He's doing things like that really certainly walks and talks and sounds like the leader of the class.
I think that's a really good point, Jeff, and that is an important addition to this conversation, and I think that should be included in the record. I'm glad you said it. Let me kind of follow up on that with, you can keep this kind of brief if you want to, but I said to our audience before you came on that I think this is the most interesting crop of defensive line recruits that we've ever talked about in any one cycle for Georgia. Jeff, there are some years where there's just not, a lot of big-time defensive line names out there because this is a position where great talent is pretty rare. This happens to be one of those years where there are a lot, and obviously Georgia's not the only one interested in these guys. You've seen Mikael Williams at Georgia this week, but you've also seen like Christian Miller at Ohio State, and clearly the Buckeyes have a long history of being very good at defensive line recruiting. There are names like Walter Nolan, we talked about in the past, and Travis Shaw, we talked about in the past. Can you just kind of, and plus there's already obviously names in the fold here for Georgia in its own 2022 class. Can you just kind of give me kind of a brief synopsis of the priorities for Georgia right now when it comes to defensive line recruiting, the names to know at the exclusion of some others?
Yeah, so, man, there's a lot of stuff to get through there. Brandon, I think the number one thing on the to-do list is to make sure they retain Bears' commitment. I think that's very important. People are going to worry about how much elbow grease is necessary for that one, but they're going to hope the Georgia staff is going to think like they're going to use as much elbow grease that's inside the storage closets of that new $80 million facility. I think Travis Shaw out of North Carolina is the guy that's gotten the full court press and would certainly be wanted and needed in the class. I do lump Mikael Williams in there as well as a guy that Georgia definitely has to sign. We're going to have a story about Mikael go up today as well about kind of how he feels after that first visit, after that first return to Georgia visit. I think that went very well. I think that went smashingly well actually for Georgia. And then I want to bring up this name because this dude's name's not going to be mentioned at all in any coverage over the weekend. Everybody's going to they're going to focus on what Branson's doing or what Gunner's doing and the pictures with Kojo and Gunner and Oscar Delp, and they're going to drift into that. Danny Dennis Sutton, who has Georgia in his final three with Alabama and Penn State out of Maryland. That's a number 70 overall prospect. He's coming in as well this weekend. But the guy that's going to get lost in all of this is Aaron Bryant. And Aaron Bryant is kind of like Georgia's Jordan Davis. Look what we found. Prospect. He's in Mississippi. He's only a 3-star. I think he's number 436 overall in the country. But he shifted in the pandemic from offensive line to defensive line for his junior season, and he blew up. I mean, really, when Trey Scott first started talking to him, he was like, dude, how come I don't know you? How come we hadn't been talking to you earlier? I'm looking at your film, and you got to be one of our guys. And Bryant has scheduled an official visit for the first weekend out of the gate because he felt a special connection there with Georgia. And I know folks are going to go, oh, wow. Let's say Georgia takes that thing all the way with Aaron Bryant. They're going to be like, well, Georgia missed out on somebody bigger to get Aaron Bryant. I don't think that's the case. I just think that shine has not been dropped on Aaron Bryant's name with all the rankings like these other guys have, because you want to say a late bloomer. Well, he was a late position switch for his junior year. And Aaron Bryant is a very faith-based Christian, big-time player. And listen to this, Brandon. I know people wonder about, how hard's Georgia going after this kid? Well, I think the walk is in. I think the proof is in the execution of his recruitment so far. He gets a first weekend official visit slot. There's a Bible verse in Romans, Brandon, that's at the top of his Twitter page. And Georgia created an edit for Aaron Bryant with that Bible verse in the background, in the forefront, along with a picture of him in a Georgia uniform. I don't think Georgia does that, even with all the time their digital designers had on their hands. I don't think Georgia does that for a guy that's way, way down the board. I think they do that for a guy that they'd really love to have. And you see Christian Miller, who's having a smashing 2-day visit, unofficial visit to Ohio State this month. Tyree West, the other defensive lineman that's really stinking good. He just committed back in November, down South Georgia boy out of Tift County. He actually visited FSU this weekend and tried on the jerseys as well. I don't know how much DawgNation caught a whiff of that, but Georgia's really going to be gangbusters with defensive line recruiting, Brandon. There's about 6 or 7 names. I think Georgia's probably going to end up with about 4 or 5 of them, and they're probably going to. I don't know how you feel about this, but they might take one less receiver. They might take one less player at another position in order to get all the defensive linemen they possibly can in this class.
I want to ask you about running backs before we're done here today, but couldn't help but notice Kamari Wilson on campus there as well. And, this seems to be one where Wilson does not seem to keep his affection for UGA secret. Now, he also kind of touts some other schools from time to time as well. But this is a guy who's been pretty open about his admiration for Georgia. And obviously, UGA's had great success at IMG Academy in the past. What do you make of Wilson being on campus this week?
I tell you what, we got to say this. We got to give the Bees a little bit of props on this, because this is a player that Georgia has way at the top of the board, the nation's number 1 safety. I think he's a top 15, top 14 overall recruit. He visited Georgia Tech this week, the same week he visited Georgia. And I don't know if I've ever said that before about a 5-star, especially at the top of the board for Georgia. So Georgia Tech at least got him in the house. Of course, Kamari Wilson also visited Auburn this week as well, and he visited Georgia on the first day he possibly could. And it's going to be interesting to see which weekend he shows up on his official visit to Georgia. There's a little bit of debate about whether he's coming in on both weekends. One is an unofficial, that IMG weekend on the 18th of this month, or whether he might slip in this weekend on an official as well. So, Kamari. And, Brandon, I'm going to give you a good thing to worry about is if this conversation doesn't get you nervy-kneed enough as it is. Kamari Wilson wears number 24. Malachi Starks wears number 24. They're both potential, upper echelon, all-SEC safeties at the minimum in Georgia's defensive backfield, should Wilson choose Georgia. And Malachi certainly has a special family connection to the number 24. It'd be very interesting to see who would wind up with 24 if both of those guys sign with Georgia. And again, here's what's getting lost, Brandon. I think Connor, kind of kicked the tires on this a little bit. Everybody's looking at receivers. Everybody's looking at Big Branson. Everybody's looking at the defensive line group. Very quietly, Brandon, there's the potential ceiling for Georgia to add, I think, 5 5-stars in the class of 2022 at defensive back. And, they've already got 2. There's names like Keon Sabb. There's names like Kamari Wilson, who we've already mentioned, that's out there, Dalen Everett as well, a couple other cornerbacks out there on the market as well. There's a chance that Georgia might bring in 4 5-stars, 3, 4, 5 5-stars in the 2022 class. Brendan, that's never been done before at Georgia.
Let me just say this. Wilson going to Tech on his way to Georgia is a little bit like stopping through Phoenix City, Alabama on your way to the Florida Gulf Coast. There are just some things you do because that's what geography requires of you. That would be my suggestion there when it comes to a Kamari Wilson. But I guess we'll give Tech a little bit of credit for trying to host some visitors there. You mentioned Branson Robinson a moment ago. This seems like a pretty important week for Georgia's running back recruiting. I obviously love Robinson, both as a player and what you see from him off the field, too, including interviews that you've done with him. There's also Richard Young from the class of 2023 as well. Really a pretty pivotal time for running back recruiting, is it not?
Very pivotal. I think, Brandon, if you were a 2023 recruit, got to mention the name Justice Haynes in there as well.
Please do. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think Justice is as highly wanted as anybody in the 2023 class by Georgia, right up there with LT Overton. But the I mean, this is kind of the pitch, man. You'll sit there and you'll go, okay, there's no way in the world that James Cook and Zamir White will be around in 2022 or 2023. Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton, those guys look like they'll also be in the league by 2022, 2023. So, and then the most important thing here, Brandon, is this is going to be very strong for Georgia on the trail this year. Might even be one of the closing arguments, which allow them to eventually one day sign Branson Robinson. Is Lavassier Carroll looks like he's a full-time corner. Definitely out of need, definitely out of ability. And that means Georgia didn't sign a back at all in 2021, Brandon. I can't remember the last time Georgia didn't sign a single running back in any one given class. So that means that makes Georgia look even more appetizing for a big talent like Branson Robinson. I think he's very much the ideal running back recruit, Brandon. I know if you could go and order up, I know you're a foodie. I know if you could order up everything exactly the way you want it and order up a next member of RBU like you're a 5-year-old child or whatever. I'm telling you, Branson, I can't think of a box he doesn't check, man, except for maybe the fact he doesn't live in Atlanta and can't host everybody. Branson Robinson is a guy that when he's in the room, very accomplished All-American players start going, man, I need to do some speed work, or man, I need to do some more push-ups, or man, I need to start eating a lot of protein. He's a guy, much like Big Bear Alexander, that are foundational players for the class, because you look to that potential Georgia class and you go, and this other school I really like, they don't have one dude like that, much less 2 or 3. I think that's how important Branson Robinson would be for Georgia.
Totally agree. I'm 1,000,000% sold on Robinson. I like him as much as anybody we've talked about. Hey, I've kept you very long. This may be as long as we've done in a long time here. But just to kind of close it out, anything you want to say that we didn't bring up, that you do think matters? What should we have talked about that we didn't?
I'm going to tell you this, and I hope it's going to come out in the umpteen million stories I'm going to write this month, and also probably I won't go to sleep until July the 4th maybe. But too much focus is right now on the $80 million Georgia spent, because those are details, things like the $12,000 lockers or what's still to come, where Georgia will have a facility much like Clemson where there would be 24/7 restaurants, where there's an app, Brandon, where the players will have where they can order food on the app and go pick it up in the facility.
Wow.
And that's another level. There's all this stuff, and it's like that dangling keys, Brandon, in front of a baby, that I want everybody to picture that, how you capture attention and you say, you know, Georgia's catching up with Bama, Georgia's catching up with Clemson. They're going to have as good a stuff as anybody else. This is what's going to get lost in all that copy and all those bullet points and everything else. The one thing I've heard over and over, and you're going to see this reflected in a lot of copy and a lot of words on DawgNation to come over the next few days, is the people at Georgia are the prizes that are shining the most right now this week. I mentioned Kirby Smart in the selfies, Scott Cochran, Dan Lanning, Dell McGee. Those guys are doing an amazing job. But it's the people at Georgia, the ladies in their recruiting office. I've heard Logan Reed's name mentioned over and over again. And if you follow Georgia recruiting heavily and you don't know the names of like Katie Turner and Logan Reed and Angela Kirkpatrick yet and Cam Lemons, those guys right there, which is kind of the glue of the recruiting machine at Georgia, people keep telling me, is like, man, all that stuff's great. All that stuff's as good as anybody else. But the people at Georgia are still is what the deciding factor and why I want to go to school here.
I think that's really well said, Jeff, and I think that's an important point to bring up and a great way to close out our conversation. Thank you for being here on the road, assisted by AAA here today. I know you've got a lot of stuff planned at DawgNation.com, covering everything as it happens for UGA recruiting. I appreciate that, and we will look forward to, of course, getting a chance to speak to you very soon as well.
All right, Brandon, everybody have a good weekend. And now Jeff Sentel is going to get on the laptop for the next 2 or 3 days, man. Take care, buddy.
Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I obviously kept Jeff for a very long time. I appreciate his time. I think what he says there at the end is really, really important. I've said this before. We have a lot of small business owners that listen to our show each and every day, and what I'm about to say, they already know to be true. But if this is not your world, I think that you may not properly understand this in the context of what's going on with the recruiting. Jeff is 1,000,000% right. The Georgia new building is incredibly nice, and I talked about this yesterday. I have a little bit of a taste for the finer things, so when you see like this really nice leather on the seats and the flashing lights on the walls, things like that, I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff works on me. But as Jeff just said there at the end of that conversation, ask any small business owner. I'm going to give you a choice. You can either have the nicest building to house your business or the best employees to help manage your business. You want nice building, better employees. The better small business owners, the smart small business owners, will take employees over commercial real estate any day of the week, because if you have a nice building and no employees, eventually you won't be able to keep that building anymore. But if you have really good employees, no matter how bad your building is, eventually you can build as nice a building as you want. It's people who power organizations. It's not the buildings themselves necessarily, which is not to say that it's a bad thing to build buildings. It's just that people are more important. So the Georgia recruiting success, even though it's kind of a nice thing to be able to say, hey, come look at our new building, it is going to be the people who power that. In some cases, it's the assistant coaches and sort of the next level of fame, those analysts. But as Jeff said, it's also the recruiting staff. And make no mistake about this. These are areas in which Georgia can exploit without kind of bumping into NCAA rules. You can only have 10 assistant coaches, right? So there's a cap on how many you can have. But when it comes to the budget for your recruiting staff and all the ways in which they can kind of help maintain relationships with recruits, there are fewer restrictions on stuff like that, and so good programs like Georgia are going to use that. One more thing, by the way, from what Jeff said there. The idea that Clemson has an app where the players can order food anytime they want, almost like their own kind of personal in-house Uber Eats or something along those lines. I got to tell you something. That would be problematic for me, both now and when I was in college. I sort of picture me arriving in the program looking like Will Shipley and leaving the program looking like Brian Brzee. If I had a chance to order food anytime that I wanted to, I'd be Jabba the Hutt by the time my career was done, I'm afraid. But nonetheless, pretty interesting stuff there. I've also got some interesting SEC through stuff to give you there as well. Busy in the SEC. First, though, quick shout out to Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Whether you're talking about the original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property or the Harris Cherokee Valley River. Sports gaming is open now. That goes along with the tremendous casino floor they already have there. Shopping, restaurant, spa, everything else. A really cool getaway. Tremendous golf, too. I've played Sequoia National before. That's a fun golf course to play there as well. So it's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. You can become a Caesars Rewards member and get some great incentives for your travel. But just book your travel to be a part of either the original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort or Harris Cherokee Valley River. That's a great summer getaway. All right, a couple of SEC through stories here. So we highlighted this as a possibility yesterday, and it is now, I think, on its way to becoming true. It's either officially true or it's about to be, that Brad Davis is leaving Arkansas as offensive line coach to take the same job at LSU after LSU had to move away from its offensive line coach related to, I guess it still hasn't been fully ironed out exactly what went on there, but LSU moved away from its offensive line coach. You can kind of fill in the gaps as to why you think that might have happened. And hiring now Davis from Arkansas here. It's been reported by Bruce Feldman, Football Scoop, and others that's going to happen. And this is actually a little bit of a loss for Arkansas after really doing a good job of holding on to its assistant coaches in the past. There was a big push by Texas to hire Barry Odom as defensive coordinator. Sam Pittman held on to him. Same thing probably for Kendall Briles to a degree, although maybe less publicized. Once again, Arkansas was able to hold on to him for a second year. Losing Davis this late in the process is obviously not a good thing, especially given the fact that Arkansas brings back some experience with its offensive line. They bring back a lot of starters for this year, a lot of that on the lines of scrimmage. So a little bit of a coup for LSU to go get Davis, being forced, it would appear to be anyway, forced to move away from its previous offensive line, James Craig. I guess now there's some wondering, and this is just like rampant speculation. I have no idea if this is true or not, but maybe Arkansas may now have to go after Randy Clements. Clements was, kind of not outed. He was ousted. I think that's the word I'm looking for. He was pushed out the door at Ole Miss as offensive line coach a few weeks ago, and maybe dissimilar to the situation at LSU, there doesn't seem to be any accusations of impropriety involving Clements leaving Ole Miss. That just seemed to be a conflict of personality with Lane Kiffin. So Clements is out there. If Arkansas wants to go after a guy that has some SEC experience, a guy who just recently was kind of moved out of a job, the opportunity to do that right there does exist. So we'll follow that. Kind of an interesting, revolving door of SEC coaches there when it comes to Davis apparently leaving Arkansas to go take the now vacant offensive line coaching job at LSU. The SEC also passed a change to the intra-conference transfer rule yesterday, following up on the rest of the conference in college football, who've all now essentially done the same thing. So you can transfer within the SEC and have immediate eligibility, just like the one-time transfer rule does create the opportunity for around the rest of college football there as well. I guess the one difference that's been described for the SEC rule in comparison to the larger NCAA rule is that if you do plan on transferring within the conference, you have to notify your current team by February 1st of your intent to do that. That you can notify later on and go outside the conference, but this is one way the SEC is trying to get a little bit of a little bit more of a stable, orderly process with this notification coming by February 1st. Obviously, that's closely tied to the end of the recruiting cycle, so teams have a chance to manage for players who might be leaving there. So that has happened. Listen, Georgia's used that to its advantage by bringing in both Brandon Turnage and Rick Gilbert, obviously. Generally speaking, I would have been in favor of this rule remaining in place, even if it hurt Georgia with some of these additions. I just think the lack of order here for college football in the SEC in particular is going to be a little bit of a problem in the future, but obviously this is the way things are going, and we will see how it plays out. A couple other things I want to get to here really quickly. I saw where David Payne-Purdom, who covers gambling for ESPN, the other day kind of put out some SEC championship odds via William Hill, the nationally known sports book. Of course, I think William Hill's now owned by Caesars, I think. Is that right? Either way, William Hill puts this out. David Payne-Purdom shares it on Twitter. So you see all the odds here. You go down to the bottom, schools like Vanderbilt, 750 to 1, Arkansas, South Carolina, Mississippi State, all 150 to 1. But if you look at the top here for a moment, the best I can tell, there are only probably about, 5 teams that have any reasonable shot of winning the SEC. Bama is actually a minus money favorite, which means they are more likely to win the league than not. Georgia at 13-5, a little bit less than 3-1 there. And you get A&M at 9-1, LSU at 12-1, and Florida at 10-1. A couple thoughts from me here, just very, very quick. I don't see how you can make Florida a better favorite than LSU. I shouldn't say favorite, but give Florida more likely odds than LSU. I realize LSU plays in the more crowded SEC West, but we've also seen Florida being a point spread favorite on the road in some early look-ahead lines against LSU. That side-by-side comparison for this upcoming year, I'll just simply take LSU ahead of Florida. Obviously, a lot of you have heard me talk about Texas A&M here this year. This is one of the things that I think that can sometimes be a little frustrating about gambling. I mean, just do the math in your head, understanding that there are only 100 possible percentage points of chances to win the SEC to go around. You make Alabama substantially more than a 50% chance of winning the SEC. Georgia very, high odds to win the SEC there as well at 3-1. And yet somehow adding all this up, and listen, I'm no mathematician, but adding all of this up, somehow you only have Texas A&M 9-1 to win the SEC. I mean, it's a lot more fun if you make the odds a little truer on A&M, and those to me are just not true odds, given the fact that you've got Alabama and Georgia as odds on as they are. It seems like Texas A&M, you're getting a little shortchanged on the Aggies there at 9-1. So a little bit of a complaint from me. I mean, I do think there's a halfway interesting, arbitrage here. If you truly believe that it's an Alabama-Georgia SEC championship, if you don't give any credit to A&M whatsoever, any credit to Florida whatsoever, there's kind of an interesting arbitrage you could do with both Alabama and Georgia there to almost give yourself a chance to earn some free money, basically a free bet on Georgia to win the SEC if you wanted to put money on both sides of the Alabama-Georgia thing there. But that's only if you don't believe in Florida or A&M at all. And I think many of you probably don't. So maybe if you're a gambler, you can think about that a little bit. We'll make that your SEC through. Really quickly here, I want to give a shout-out to a couple former Georgia greats here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. I was very happy to see Garrison Hurst, the former Georgia running back, and Champ Bailey, the former Georgia cornerback, who Bailey's already in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, both on the ballot for the College Football Hall of Fame. By the way, if you ever want to understand how weird the College Football Hall of Fame is, just understand the fact that Bailey is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame before he makes the College Football Hall of Fame, even though his pro football career obviously extended far beyond his college career. There is just a weirdness to the College Football Hall of Fame that I'll never quite understand, but I think it's really cool to see both Bailey and Hurst on this ballot. I know our buddy Mike Griffith's going to write about this at DawgNation.com at some point in the days to come here too. It's always, I think, interesting to remind, because we have an entire generation of our audience who watches us or listens to us that don't quite, they never saw Bailey play at Georgia. Saw him play in the NFL, but never saw him play at Georgia. And then, Garrison Hurst, who ended his Georgia career in 1992, there's an entire other, generation of Georgia fans who didn't see Hurst play when he was at UGA. I think one of the cool things, and I do appreciate history, both the history that I was alive to experience and the history that happened before I was old enough to know what was going on. I think it's important when guys like this show up on ballots, it does give us a chance to say, boy, pay attention to how good this guy was. In the case of Bailey, I think one of the things that gets forgotten because he was such a great cornerback was, go back to say 1998, Bailey was probably Georgia's best offensive player that year there as well. Certainly its most reliable pass catching target, someone that, Quincy Carter loved throwing the ball to. So Bailey was a very good two-way player during his time at Georgia, that kind of bubble screen that he's scored on so many times, tremendous player. And in the case of Garrison Hurst, some of y'all have heard me say before that I absolutely believe that Hurst got robbed when it comes to the 1992 Heisman Trophy. That's like my most homerish, kind of even to this day, this thing, I still believe that Hurst deserved that Heisman Trophy over Gino Toretta, the Miami quarterback who actually won the award, and then Marshall Faulk, the other, very good player from that year, who was I would say, better player in the NFL than he was there at college at San Diego State, but a very good and deserving player as in his own right. But to me, it was Hurst's year to win the award, and he did not quite get that. If you want to know more about what Hurst was as a player, the fact that Hurst, as starting running back at Georgia, his key backup in 1992 was Terrell Davis, who would go on in his own right to become a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and yet played behind Garrison Hurst at UGA. That gives you an idea of what Hurst was doing in a Georgia uniform, because when Davis was playing in 92, he was playing well. His numbers were actually really good. It's just that Hurst was playing the game at a Heisman Trophy level for Georgia there that year. So both Hurst and Bailey on the College Football Hall of Fame ballot. Nice to see them getting some deserving attention. I'd love to see them both enshrined. Obviously, the College Football Hall of Fame just down the road from us here in the city of Atlanta. So we'll get ready to wrap up a busy show, busy week for us here today, and we'll do so with our Gatorade roll call, including our Golden Shoe Award. And, of course, our buddy Mad Dog steps back up to the plate to win. Mad Dog's won a lot of these, all of them deserving. I thought this was really funny. He says, when you find out Rick Gilbert's transferring to Georgia, this is on Twitter, there's an angry Dan Mullen pointing, and something about Rick Gilbert running with the LSU uniform on with the sign that says Athens bound. That's very funny. Good stuff from Mad Dog. He gives you the hashtag Golden Shoe, and I would say that's a very deserving Golden Shoe for our buddy Mad Dog today. Very good stuff there. Speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, let's close out this week by saying Gator Hater Countdown, 148 days from right now. Georgia, back in Jacksonville, some revenge against those Gators, and boy, won't that be a fun thing to see. Hope all of you have a great weekend. You're enjoying your summer. We'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews will show up. They'll do all that for you. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can find them today. rsandrews.com, specifically thinking about that air conditioning, get that system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Important that you be able to do that, so make sure you check them out today. I'm going to start on YouTube today. I think I started on Facebook first yesterday. I may have that wrong, but I believe I'm right about that. We'll take some YouTube comments and then some Facebook comments, and we'll let y'all get going on the weekend here. Yita Cookie says, I was at most of Hurst's home games as a kid and saw him in person and forgot how good he was until I watched some highlights the other day. Yeah, very, very good. Really, Georgia's offense in 92 was terrific. You had Hurst, Heisman Trophy level running back, Eric Zier, quarterback. And listen, Zier, after all these years, his passing numbers still hold up really well at a time when the sport was not about passing as much as it is now. The Zier numbers still look tremendous. And, of course, Andre Hastings at wide receiver, a very good receiver there as well. One of the heartbreaking losses for me as a fan was that 92 loss to Tennessee. Georgia had a lot of turnovers. Future Congressman Heath Shuler was at quarterback for the Vols, wearing, I think, number 21, which is kind of a strange number for a quarterback to wear. That was a very, very disappointing loss for me way back then. Foster Moss says, if Florida offered you $2 to $3 million to cover and do a daily show for them, are you chomping? I'd like to say I would not, but for $2-3 million, I mean, listen, who am I to argue with the great wisdom of the $1 million man, Ted DiBiase, who says everybody has a price. I'd like to think I'm better than that, but if we're talking about 7-figure money, I might make good on Ted DiBiase's prophecy. Connor Graham says crowd noise will make a difference for those guys that have only played in 25% capacity stadiums. That could be true. Connor's point I would also add to that is that, when you want to make a comparison between like the LSU team of 2019, the Alabama team of 2020, the fact that LSU did have to play and win games in hostile stadiums, I do think is a nod over them. If you're thinking about best teams and recent SEC memory and history, that's an argument in favor of LSU because they had to do something a year ago that Alabama did not do in 2020. Jay Shipes going hard at our buddy Nature Gator here. Robert Barnes, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Frank Patterson says Hurst had a knee scoped on Monday and ran for 100 yards the following Saturday. Yeah, he was a tough guy. Very much so. Jim McLaughlin going back to Randy Clement saying, imagine having a personality conflict with Lane Kiffin. That's pretty funny stuff. G. Grace Bama Boy, no fan of JT Daniels, it appears. Jordan Bowman says Texas A&M isn't built to dominate teams on the scoreboard. Playing good defense and running the ball doesn't generate points like it used to. I mean, I don't think that's an unfair thing to bring up, and it's one of the reasons why, even though I do believe – listen, you can go back and listen to me say a lot of this kind of stuff a year ago, and it turned out I was right about that when it comes to the Aggies. And I'm, still, a believer they're a contender in the SEC West. But I think that Jordan's point, for the most part, is a pretty good one in that, you don't ever really bring up Texas A&M in the same conversation that you do with Georgia of needing to prove they have that firepower offensively. But, last year they didn't really show that to you. And not only does it maybe hurt you in a game like Alabama, but I'd suggest it also hurts you with the natural bias that maybe creeps into the college football playoff selection committee. When you're not scoring 40 and 50 points a game, there's a tendency that maybe the committee, has just to kind of discount you and discredit you because you're not doing offensively what other teams are doing. Jay Shipes asking about Lavassier Carroll, who's practicing now as a defensive back. As Jeff Sentel mentioned during the interview today, I think at this point in time, you can fairly well consider Carroll to be a defensive back. I don't think he probably is working out with the running backs anytime in the near future. If that changes, obviously we'll update that. But I think for now, it's probably safe to assume that Carroll may be a defensive back. Let's see what else. Robert Barnes on the subject of gambling. I think my point on the futures gambling odds is that, and listen, I like gambling stuff and I like talking about it, but if you ever want to kind of just get really frustrated about just how the system is sort of rigged against the average bettor, just go look, do the math, do the reverse engineering math of turn everybody's odds into a percentage chance, then add all those percentages together. You get way more than 100%. The excess above 100% is called a hold. That's kind of the built-in odds the casino gives itself, the sports book gives itself. It's one of the reasons why I guess the savvy gambler sometimes stays away from the futures plays. But as far as the idea, and the other thing that Robert brings up is it's all about balancing the money. That's actually one of the most gigantic misnomers about gambling, that sports books almost never have 50% of the money on both sides. Sports books are actually a lot more comfortable having an imbalance of money than you might realize. There are plenty of websites that kind of chronicle where the money is wagered, and it is rare for a sports book to have, because the sort of the common consensus is, the sports book gets what's called a VIG, a kind of a 10% commission, so if they have 50% of the money on one side, 50% on the other, the sportsbook makes 10% off those wagers, or what's called the handle on that game. But the truth is, almost no game ever actually has 50% money, because what the sportsbook is really trying to avoid is the really big bet from a smart bettor on one side or the other. They don't want to create a soft line that puts balance at the point spread, because eventually that soft line will get hit by someone who's willing to bet a six-figure sum, and that's probably more than some of you care to know on that. But that is kind of the psychology behind a lot of this. is the sports book will be willing to have an imbalance of money on one side or the other as long as they keep the line at a place where it doesn't get hit by someone who knows what he's doing, who's willing to make a gigantic wager. That's how sports books go into the red, at least in the short term. Over here on the Facebook side of things for a moment. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says, and boy, I love this shout out back to the past. Y'all remember the four horsemen, Tim Worley, Keith Henderson, Rodney Hampton, and Alfonso Ellis. Yeah, the 1998 Georgia Bulldogs, four running backs, all four of those running backs ended up playing in the NFL. Worley, Henderson, Hampton, Ellis. What a great collection of running backs that was. The 88 team also had some heartbreaking losses too. That's a little bit of a theme, unfortunately, for that era of Georgia football. The 88 games, that's Kentucky, is that right? And also South Carolina, back before South Carolina was in the SEC. Heartbreaking losses. Matt Rugavina says that Rodney Hampton, definitely a name we don't say enough around here, and I think Matt's right about that. Also a little bit of irony. Matt, I believe, lives in Houston. Rodney Hampton, am I correct about saying this? Hampton was also from Houston. Am I right about that? So, yeah. You can always count on Philip Jordan Wells to give you a great pop cultural reference. He says, Maury, the wig salesman from Goodfellas, taught me to never go 15 points above the vig. Very good stuff from Philip there. I was actually watching Goodfellas again the other day, so that's really funny. Nick Roundtree says Robert Edwards would have been much bigger had he not gotten injured. Yeah, I mean, y'all know I love Tony Barnhart. We have him as a frequent guest on the show. Tony one time ranked his top 10 Georgia running backs, and Edwards didn't get included. And, that to me gives you an example of the fact that of all the Georgia running backs, you can talk about, the entire history of Georgia running backs, that Edwards is the most underrated because he got hurt, like right at the very beginning. It's, for those of you who are too young to know this, just awful injury at the Pro Bowl after his rookie season. And go back and look at his numbers rookie year playing for the Patriots, 98, I guess would have been his rookie year in the NFL. He had gigantic numbers. He rushed 1,400-something yards or something like that. He had huge, crazy numbers. And then he got hurt. It was never the same again. And then that kind of just makes you forget that Edwards was big for Georgia in 97 as a first year at running back in 95. His first game, he had 5 rushing touchdowns, set a record for the program. He also dealt with some injury there that year. A fun Robert Edwards game is also the overtime game against Auburn in 96. A really fun Georgia win at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And Edwards was a big part of that game there as well. Randy Hall says, would I leave for Texas A&M for double or triple my salary? Not for double. Probably not for triple either, because I like where I live. But somebody a moment ago were talking about 7 figures. If you're getting into 7 figures at that point in time, you got to at least start thinking about it. Gerald Harmon also shouting out Tim Jennings. You love to see that. Randy Hall says, where would I rank Swift? That's a really good question. Oh, that's a good question. Am I wrong for saying kind of like modern era, Smart plus the end of the Richt years? I think you probably have to go, here's probably how I'd do it. I'd probably go Chubb, Gurley, Michelle, Swift. Y'all okay with that? I mean, do you think I'm wrong? And that's without looking at stats and kind of getting too deep in any of this kind of stuff. I'd probably go Chubb number 1 overall from like these recent years. I'd go Gurley number 2 over that. I'd go Michelle after that, and then I'd probably get Swift in just after that. That's how I'd probably go with those. Y'all tell me if you think that's wrong or not. Matt Rukavina talking about the video that exists of me saying hook 'em horns on camera. Yeah, so you want proof of me doing anything for money, basically. So like the old days, our organization was structured differently than it is now. Now we pretty much only do DawgNation and a little bit of SEC country, but at one point in time we had 8 gazillion websites, and we do all these spec spots for prospective advertisers, things like that. And so back then I just sit in the studio all day long and do 1 million of those things, and the Texas one kind of leaked out, I guess. Drico Bostic mentioning, he says, no Sean Marino over Swift. Yeah, when I was doing the Swift thing, I was kind of only doing sort of like the Gurley, the Kirby Smart years. But I would probably agree with you that Noshawn certainly belongs on a higher plane, higher threshold of Georgia running backs. This is a first-round pick. I don't think anything proves the greatness of Noshawn Marino better than his performance against Florida in 2007. Absolutely proves all of that. Philip Jordan Wells bringing up Jasper Sanks. Obviously Sanks had his issues from time to time, but the call against him at Georgia Tech remains the single worst call that I think any of us have ever seen. Randy Hall said, "Will Jabba the Hutt be on my desk soon?" After I referenced Jabba a little earlier in the show. That's funny. All right, we're going to do one or two more. Get ready to go. Bruce Eklund says, national championship or bust. He says, it's great for outsiders to claim for us. And he says, but you got Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, others still trying to win. So the point that Bruce is making there is one that I guess I was kind of trying to articulate a little earlier, and I think I could have said it more clearly than I did. I take Bruce to mean right there that he thinks that some of these media types are using this national championship or bust commentary as a way of setting up Georgia for failure. And I think it's really interesting how prevalent that belief is amongst some UGA fans right now. I think it's probably just media trying to have something to write about. But it is interesting to see the ways in which some Georgia fans are very suspicious of the media types who are kind of pushing that national championship or bust type narrative related to Georgia right now. All right, back on YouTube here for a moment. Scott Harris says Marino was awesome. Yeah, if you're doing all-time Georgia running backs, including kind of all of it, I would say that Marino ranks pretty high. I don't know that I have the mental capacity to do the full ranking right now. It's clearly Herschel 1, but I think you have to say Marino probably in the top 5, don't you? Probably so. Without doing it in my head, you probably have to. Cine OG on YouTube mentioning Keith Marshall is a great back but stayed hurt. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen the best of Keith Marshall in a uniform, in a Georgia uniform for sure. Frank Patterson says, can we please schedule a home and away with the Hurricanes? Put that in the atmosphere. That would be a fun one. Yeah, going down to Coral Gables for that game would be certainly fun. All right. I'm glad that Wildman Slayer says this on YouTube. That 19, we could unfortunately talk about heartbreaking Georgia losses for 700 years, especially from this sort of like late 80s, early mid-90s era. But that 95 Tennessee game, he's so right about this. So Edwards eventually leaves that game with injury. If you go back and watch the highlights, there were a lot of very questionable tackles, from some of these Tennessee guys back then. Don't think I still hold a grudge on some of that kind of stuff. But the point is like, Edwards, like in Neyland Stadium, just absolutely giving Georgia a chance to win a game. Back then, beating Tennessee on the road was a huge deal. And, Edwards was giving Georgia a chance to do it. So, yeah, that 95 Tennessee game, Lucky Man says Marino over Michelle. So to be really clear here for a moment, I should have been more clear about my running back ranking a moment ago. I was ranking kind of more recent modern day backs from Gurley and the backs from the Kirby Smart era. I think if you're going to do all-time Georgia running backs, there's no doubt Noshawn Marino, I would say, is in that top 5 for sure. Mark Abe giving Georgia grief for not having a national championship trophy. Yeah, listen, Mark, I think Georgia fans would all say this. That's kind of a missing piece. That's the thing you want to have there. And listen, when I go into these Georgia facilities, I haven't been in the new one, but in the old, Buttsmeer building, I love to see that Rose Bowl trophy sitting there. I love those SEC championship trophies. And obviously, and when I was a kid, go take pictures from time to time of that national championship trophy. I like all of that. But there's clearly a need to get that national championship trophy. Now, I don't think any Georgia fan would deny that. All right, we're going to get ready to go here. All right, anything else before we're done? Really good stuff. Oh, yeah, John William Adams also reminding us of the University of Miami not playing in Coral Gables anymore. They're playing, or I guess they never really did, but playing in the big stadium there. That's probably a pretty good point. Ken Feinberg says, here's his ranking. Herschel 1, Chubb 2, Gurley 3, Hurst 4. Yeah, you might put Noshawn Marino at 5, and you may have that. That may be the list right there. Jimmy Durham, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. It has been a fun week, and I appreciate all of you for making it so fun. I also hope all of you have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself. Get outside. Have some fun. Make the most of the summer here, and I'm going to try to do the same thing, and then we'll see you back here on Friday. Don't forget to check out RS Andrews, by the way, as well for your air conditioning, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll take really good care of you. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. And make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as well, ajc.com. Hawks getting going this weekend against the Philadelphia 76ers. Can you believe we're talking about the Hawks in the second round of the NBA playoffs? It seems like an amazing thing to be discussing. Less happy news, the Atlanta Braves right now, but they did get a win yesterday to kind of salvage a split with the Washington Nationals. They get the Dodgers coming into town now. I guess buckle your chin straps for that one. It's being billed as a National League Championship Series rematch, but I don't quite know it's going to have that vibe, unfortunately, for the Braves here this weekend. Also, always a great list of fun things to do on the weekend at the AJC, including some outdoor like movie things and stuff like that here this weekend. It's great to see folks back traveling around again and having some fun on the weekends in the Atlanta area. That's a great thing to be able to see. So please make sure you check out all of that. Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. Hey, y'all have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you all back here again on Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.